It's interesting, I was bused to a predominantly white middle school, and I was in a combination of, I guess, honors classes. And so in honors history and English, we didn't really learn too much about cultural figures of color outside of course, Harriet Tubman, Dr. King, Rosa Parks, that kind of stuff. In high school, I went to my neighborhood high school, which was predominantly black, and I had black English teachers in my advanced classes, and they were the ones to talk about Lawrence Dunbar, Nikki Giovanni, those types of people that you aren't going to hear too much about unless you're taking a specific African American studies oriented sort of class.
Did I feel like I was representing the material I was learning? One time of the year, Black History Month, I guess. Looking back on it, it was hard to find very key people in history who looked like me. And it's not because they didn't exist, it's because it seems like the way the curriculum is set up in the United States, it's prone to focus more on American history from a European standpoint versus from the standpoint of African people of African descent or the Native American standpoint, and even later from immigrants and migrant standpoints.
So growing up in Connecticut, it was a lot more instilled upon me. I was surrounded by Peruvian individuals and my culture and my language, and it heavily influenced how I viewed myself. However, when we moved to Florida, I moved to a very rural, white-dominated town. And so in order for us to assimilate, my culture was kind of dismissed, not on purpose or consciously, but more in order to, I guess, survive, because we were one of the only Latino families in that town. So English was spoken more heavily in my household. And cultural Peruvian traditions were not practiced as often, and more of the heavily dominated like white holidays and white traditions were more instilled in us. And so I kind of dismissed my own culture during my like high school developmental period.
I think sometimes people just assume that, okay, you're a minority student, so you know what it means to be diverse. But there are different things that come along with being a diverse student.
I think it depends on what kind of minority students we're talking about. There's been a substantial decline in African American males, black males at UF. I think that's concerning because that's not representative of the state demographics. We've seen an increase in Latino students. We've seen a decline in Asian American students. So really it depends on what student we're talking about. There is no one experience for students of color at all. But I do think that they share a lot more struggles than are talked about in safe spaces. So I'd like to see an increase in those discussions. I think sometimes it's really difficult for students of color because they don't see themselves represented in texts, in classes, as in learning about their histories. And they don't see them represented in administration, in faculty, and in staff positions. So it certainly isn't easy to be a student of color.
I think it varies. I think it will depend on what exact minority student that you're talking about. So if I'm looking strictly at the CERU data, what I know is that African American students report that they are the least satisfied in terms of people of color at this institution. But I also know that there are, from what I understand, the Hispanic Latino students report that they do feel very supported on this campus. So, and that's based off the data. So if I'm looking at that, then I see a huge disparity in itself between who gets the treatment and who doesn't, and who feels supported and who doesn't. So to clump everyone into one, I don't think I can do, just because I look at that data and because I work so closely with, of course, the Black community, the Black African American community. So I know what the struggles are that they experience while they're here. I know their frustrations. I know how happy they are to be a Gator Nation and to be able to say that they're a Gator, but the experience here for them is not good. So especially, and it's evident from how our alumni, so our Black alumni, do not come back. They do not give back. And it's because they have these and I won't say horrible because everyone isn't horrible, but they're not the best experiences. And so they don't feel like they have the same connection and the ties as the majority student.
So I think right now the campus climate is that, well, at least in the Black community, is that people are they're feeling a bit tense, and they are nervous about what's going to be the next thing that happens. Because 2 years ago when I was a sophomore, first it was the blackface incident, and then there was an incident where a Black girl was walking down Fraternity Row and people were screaming very racist and sexist slurs at her. And so at that point, people were just like, wow, what else? And then people are protesting around the Trayvon Martin case, and someone writes the N-word on one of the petition seats. Or, someone painting the 34th Street wall centering around Mike Brown, and then someone writing, thug life equals dead, and other racial slurs on there. So I think the Black community at UF, they're really aware that we have a feeling that these people don't really like us. They really just tolerate our presence. So it's always like nerve-wracking to be wondering what's next, or who's next, what's going to be the next thing that happens. And even identifying and collaborating with other communities, I kind of get the sense that they feel marginalized and that their voice often goes unheard.
Certainly tell you that there have been cuts to staff here at the university that have absolutely affected the levels of work that the remaining staff have to do. And whenever staff is being cut, we don't have less students. Actually, our student body keeps getting bigger and bigger every year. The amount of people that they have to serve keeps getting bigger and bigger every year, and there's less people to do that.
I can't say that I'm surprised that sometimes faculty and staff of color take so much more on in terms of mentoring students, in terms of being advisors or supporting minority student organizations on campus. The number of committees that I'm asked to be on by students of color is, I assume it's much higher than some of my counterparts. So I'm not surprised that faculty and staff of color are overutilized and underappreciated. But I like to remain hopeful.
You have La Casita, which is a very great space for students and faculty. Even I, as a staff, I still go there because I was a student here, 2 years ago. So I enjoy being there. I enjoy, talking to the students about their goals and dreams, and it just feels like a good place for me to just go and share experiences.
These spaces are for everyone, right? Yes, La Casita at least, and for the most part ABC, we cater to students from a particular racialized and ethnic communities, but that doesn't mean that I ignore the white student that comes in and wants to learn more about culture because he or she is traveling abroad, or he or she wants to learn more. That's why we're here. I have to provide support for Hispanic Latino students, and I also have to provide support for people wanting to learn about other cultures. That's just as valuable. That's how we create allies.
To me, when I have discussions about why this institute is so important, it's because of Black Thursday. And so Black Thursday was when Black students on this campus back in the 70s decided that they'd had enough, and they took a stand and they withdrew from this institution to say that if you do not support us, we will not support you. And if it weren't for those students who withdrew from the institution, this building would not be here. And then to me, that also means diversity really would not be represented on this campus. So it all started with those students from the Black Student Union taking a stand and saying, no, we need to be here on this campus. And so when we are dealing with everything that's happening with the mood of the country between Ferguson, Trayvon, Eric Gardner, and you're talking about fraternal events that are now happening and just continuous police brutality that we're always hearing about, it seems like on social media these days, when we're looking at the newspapers now that are reporting about the declining number in Black enrollment, like it is so important that institutes such as IBC and La Casita and the emergence of others needs to happen too, that we have these spaces, that we have these safe spaces for our students to in communities to be able to come to, so they have a place where they do feel protected, that they do feel safe, where you know that you can come into this building and you know that you will feel welcome no matter who you are and what you're bringing to the table. We're going to figure out whatever the issue is.
So the African American Studies major was recently adopted after the blackface incident 2 years ago. And I feel like that was only really implemented only to silence the Black community at UF and just to really make us complacent, like, okay, to pacify us. They gave us this, so we should be happy, when really people were fighting for an African American Studies major for years, for at least like 40 years, and it was only recently given. And it's still a program, it's not even a department, and they gave no funding to the program. So they now have a major where they have to teach more classes, but they don't have any funding to hire more faculty. And I think that is a real problem, and it shows that it's not really supported. They're just throwing them out to sink or swim. And if they don't have the resources that other programs and departments do, then how do they expect that program to flourish? So I think the status is that it's growing, and I hope that with our new president that these programs are taken more seriously, and it's not just thrown out there just to say we have it and just to represent diversity. I think a lot of times UF they are focused on being diverse and offering diverse things, but at the same time, it's not going to be effective if it's not implemented correctly.
I will say that we know the long history of the Department of African American Studies here at the University of Florida. It took more than 40 years for us to get a major, for them to be able to grant bachelor's degrees in that program. And we can attribute that to it being in liberal arts or whatever, but now it's one of the fastest growing majors in the department, in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I think that what we've seen, just, I read the news and I know what happened in Tucson, where Mexican American Studies was taken out, even though it had shown all of these wonderful, impactful returns in student retention and graduation. But I think that these programs highlight difference. And a lot of people are afraid of something that is different because there is this idea that to empower you means that one day you are going to come and overpower me. And that breeds fear in a lot of people. And I think we see that sort of dynamic and that fear play out in a number of different policy areas, even outside of education, even in the criminal justice system, even in the healthcare system. We have a field called healthcare disparities, and they are afraid to touch issues of race because it brings up ugly things, because we don't want to talk too candidly about our past, and it makes us look very critically at us as a society, whether we are recipients of benefits from white supremacy or from sexism or from classism, or if we are the victims of those systems.
The institution of University of Florida does not. The University of Florida is a predominantly white institution that does not, in my eyes, care about the minorities. If you're looking at it based, we have Asian American Studies, we have African American Studies, we have the Latin American students, or the Latin American Center for Latin American Center and some others. all of these things were fought for. All Asian Americans did not have a minor to educate themselves on. They fought for that. African Americans fought for that coursework. La Casita, IBC were fought for. So to say that the University of Florida supports us is just literally them signing a piece of paper. I could have signed a piece of paper for the KKK, and I could have supported the KKK, but that does not mean that I fought and saw the significance of it. The University of Florida does not give us things, and this kind of goes into the bigger picture. The United States doesn't give us things. People of color for generations in history have fought for their own liberation, for their voices to be heard, and that's what we've been doing at the University of Florida. Our voices have not been heard, so we've been raising hell and fighting for these courses, for these institutions, for these programs, to allow us to empower ourselves and to show that our culture and our history and stories actually matter. So to answer your question, no.
Ethnic studies is the study of anything that makes us different. So we're talking about race, we're talking about nationality, we're talking about gender, sexuality, and it's not just about women and people of color and queer people. We have whiteness studies, and we study masculinity as well. And so I think that I enjoy ethnic studies. I think it's important, and it helps us to learn about us and to learn about other people.
Ethnic studies is empowerment. Learning about yourself is empowerment. Whenever you no longer see assimilation and whitewashing as the only path towards learning, as the only path towards academia, as the only path towards scholarship, and you actually see like, oh wow, so learning about myself is actually a path, a very viable path, a very valuable path towards scholarship and towards learning, that's a very empowering position to be in.
So I was 17, right? And I didn't know I was Latina until I came to live to the U.S. In my head, I had never even heard the term, or like maybe heard the term, but not come to see myself as that. It bothered me when people were like, oh, you're Latina. And I was like, I've never thought about this. And like, why are you telling me who I am? Like I'm not asking you to tell me who I am. But right away, they would meet me and they're like, oh, you're Latina. And I was like, you haven't even asked me for my name, like what I like, anything. You just go and tell me who that's how they made sense of me in my presence, at that moment with them. That's how they could relate me. So then once I started reading about the histories, I actually choose to identify myself as Latina because to me, it's this also whole sense of unity with all, the other Latin American countries.
What I see the most from students is that they enjoy learning something that they didn't know, or they enjoy learning a different perspective of something that they thought they knew. And I think the beauty of ethnic studies is we live our lives in a bubble of I know what my experience is, and I'm pretty sure most people have an experience like me, and if they don't have an experience like me, that means that something's wrong with them. And so what ethnic studies does is it bursts that bubble, and it teaches you more about your experience than you ever thought you knew, and it teaches you about how our different experiences intersect to create a broader experience. And it also helps us to understand how our society works and what we can do as activists, as academics, as professionals to sort of change society to make sure that we all have an equal opportunity of employment, equal opportunity at quote unquote the good life.
I think the future of ethnic studies does look bright because of the people who will not take no for an answer. But at the same time, the people who are totally against it are being very extreme, and their voice is being heard because they are screaming loud and they have a lot of people backing them. Just like the whole thing in Arizona, and then the new, I forgot what state it was it Ohio, where they said that they didn't want to teach AP US history according to the College Board because it wasn't teaching that America was, it wasn't giving the sense of like America as the best country in the world. It was tarnishing America's reputation. So it wasn't teaching the exceptionalism. And So I feel like those things do threaten it, but at the same time, there is a growing group of people that want to learn real history, authentic, not just the sugar-coated Disney version of U.S. history.
I think in order for this country to progress and to be the progressive country that we say we are, every story should be heard, but the truth, not the white sugar-coated, like, oh, you know, they were this, so the white savior had to come and colonize them and make them civilized. No, like, the white savior does not exist. This was the white colonizer came to overthrow and take power, and it's a gruesome and disgusting story, but that's why the ethnic studies matter, so that you hear both perspectives and you also hear the voices of those who have been silenced for so long.
I absolutely believe ethnic studies would help that. I think that ethnic studies is the future of our nation, because we, even though, you know, power and the economics are strongly tied in the hands of a very small group of people, the demographics of this country is changing. And you have to take into account the fact that these people want this information. These people are thirsting for this knowledge. And when we understand these systems at work, then we can understand how we can shape our structures to better accommodate everyone, so that everyone has that access to opportunity. I think that a lot of people become defensive when you talk about classism and income inequality, and they're rich. People become defensive, you know, because they feel like you are attacking them when you really are only just discussing the issue at hand. People who are white or who consider themselves white oftentimes become defensive when we're talking about issues of race and issues of inequality that are linked to race. And so I think that part of what we have to do is we have to actually have these conversations, and we have to have these discourses, and we have to have people from these groups. We have to have LGBT people engaging in LGBT scholarship, so that they can go out and they can actually inform people about what it is to be an LGBT person, and how you as a non-LGBT person can actually help to break down these inherent systems of inequality.
I'm a nature person, and I really appreciate trees, but a tree's roots go really, really deep. And it's what lays the foundation for the tree to be able to keep growing and rise up into the sky. I think human beings are similar. They need to understand their roots and where they come from in order to continue to, you know, grow and develop and you know, reach towards the sky as well.